They say money can buy silence, but it can't buy a clean conscience. Marcus Sterling was a man who measured human worth in zeros.
To him, the world was divided into two simple categories: predators and prey. He spent 40 years building an empire of glass and steel, convinced that he was untouchable. But on a Tuesday that started like any other, Marcus made a mistake. A mistake that cost him everything he had spent a lifetime protecting. It wasn't a bad investment. It wasn't a market crash. It was a simple plastic name tag, pinned to the rags of a man he had just spat on. If you think you know how this story ends, you're wrong. Because in the archive, justice doesn't just knock, it breaks the door down. Pay close attention, because the truth behind that name tag is something you will never see coming. Marcus Sterling stepped out of his black limousine on Fifth Avenue. The air smelled of expensive cologne and cold ambition. He was 10 minutes late for a merger that would make him the most powerful man in the city. But his path was blocked. An old man sat against the revolving doors. Weathered, tired, and smelling of the damp streets. He held a cardboard sign that Marcus didn't even bother to read. "Move," Marcus hissed, his voice like a razor. The old man looked up. His eyes weren't filled with anger. They were filled with pity. That was the spark that lit the fuse. Marcus, the man who owned half the skyline, couldn't handle being pitied by a ghost. In a fit of calculated cruelty, Marcus took his hot espresso and poured it slowly over the old man's boots. "Now you're wet and poor," Marcus laughed. "Get out of my sight before I have the police sweep you away like the trash you are."
The old man didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, scratched piece of plastic.
A name tag from a company that hadn't existed in 30 years. As Marcus turned to enter the building, he caught a glimpse of it in the corner of his eye. He froze. The world around him seemed to lose its sound. The honking taxis, the wind, the rain. It all went silent. He looked at the name tag. Then he looked at the old man's face again. Beneath the dirt, beneath the gray beard, he saw a jawline he recognized. He saw a scar on the brow that matched the one Marcus saw every morning in his own reflection. "Where did you get that?" Marcus whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in his life. The power was gone. The billionaire was suddenly just a terrified little boy in an expensive suit. The old man stood up slowly, his joints creaking, leaning against the cold glass of the empire Marcus called home. He didn't look like a beggar anymore. He looked like a judge. He leaned in close, his breath visible in the freezing air, and whispered 5 words that changed everything Marcus thought he knew about his own life. 5 words that would turn his billions into dust by the time the sun went down. Do you want to know what he said? Do you want to know whose name was really on that tag? The answer is buried in a grave Marcus thought he had closed decades ago. But in this archive, nothing stays buried forever. Welcome to the day that changed everything. The old man leaned in, his voice a gravelly rasp. He said, "I am the real Marcus Sterling." Marcus felt the ground disappear beneath him. 30 years ago, a young, ambitious intern had stolen the identity of a brilliant engineer who had disappeared after a tragic lab accident. That intern was the man in the $5,000 suit. He had built his entire life on a lie, assuming the man he robbed was dead. But the real Marcus Sterling hadn't died. He had survived, broken and forgotten, living in the shadows of the city he helped design. He had waited for this exact moment. The name tag wasn't just a piece of plastic. It was the original ID from the day of the accident, stained with the same chemicals that had scarred them both. Within 48 hours, the empire began to crumble. The old man wasn't there for money. He was there for the truth. He had filed a claim decades in the making, backed by DNA evidence he had finally gathered. The merger was canceled. The bank accounts were frozen. The board of directors turned their backs on the imposter. 1 week later, the man who was once the king of Fifth Avenue was standing on the same sidewalk where he had poured his coffee in contempt. He had no suit, no limousine, and no name. He looked at the revolving doors of his former building. The real Marcus Sterling walked out. He stopped, looked at the man who had stolen his life and did something unexpected. He didn't spit. He didn't laugh. He simply handed him a hot cup of coffee and a cardboard sign.
"The archive always balances the books," the old man said, before disappearing into a waiting car. "What would you do if you discovered your entire life was built on someone else's shadow? Would you fight for the lie or accept the truth? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And remember, be careful who you step on today. You might be looking at your own future. The file is closed. I'll see you in the next story.